Hi, my name's Tom McCurdy, and today I want to talk about creating a dynamic indexer in C Sharp. It was a question that was stemmed from one of the comments in the Solo Learn section, and I thought it was somewhat interesting, so I thought I would share how you can actually accomplish something like this. To begin with, though, let's talk about what I mean by a dynamic indexer. So this is a basic class that I have set up right now, and it's called clients. And basically, clients has a private array of strings that's keeping track of names. And then we have a normal indexer of type string that allows you to get and set values inside this class. And if you remember, an indexer is a way for you to define an interface into a class where you can access items by saying, you know, C3 equals Tom. And of course, if you're using C, you would have to create an instance of that class first. So let's say clients C equals new clients, and then we can say C3 equals Tom, and of course we're going to want to be able to see that, so console.write line C3, and I forgot the parentheses there. So we run this, and this is a basic indexer for these clients. We define with the indexer how we want to be able to treat when we try to index into an instance of this class. So C is an instance of class clients. With the indexer, we define what we should do when we want to set into an index of it, in this case Tom, and then this is actually getting the value, so we're using both of them there. This makes sense, but what happens if you want to have something other than just strings? What happens if you want to be able to have a list of ints as well? Which is kind of an odd concept for clients, but let's go with it. And this is what I would call a dynamic indexer, is how we're going to approach this. So let's start with some fresh code here, and we'll continue with the name client so you have a way of comparing to it. And so we'll do class clients, and instead of using an array of strings, our first major change is that we're going to have to use a generic. And because we want to be able to insert at any index, we're going to use a dictionary as opposed to something like a list where you would have to create the items before you're able to access them. So let's use a dictionary as a kind of our private base variable. And what we're going to do is say dynamic int, and then dynamic data equals new dictionary int dynamic. So this is allowing us to use a dictionary, and the values that we're going to be storing in the dictionary are going to be of type dynamic. So this allows us to actually start creating our indexer now. So now that we've defined our private variable, let's set up our indexer. So this time, instead of having string here like we did last time, we're going to have a dynamic type. And then the rest of it's the same type of setup that you have to do for any type of indexer. So public dynamic this int index versus, I believe it was here, public string this int index. So again, the string we're changing into a type dynamic. Again, we're going to have to set our get and our set accessors here. So we'll do get, and then we'll have our set. And for our get, what we want to do is what we want to do is display what's at data sub index. So you might be tempted to just say return data set index, but let's be a little bit more clever than that, because we want to make sure that whatever we're returning actually has data in there. So we'll say if data dot contains key index. So if there is data in our dictionary at the index we're attempting to access, then we'll return data index, so just like we had before. Else, so if there's no data in that point in the dictionary, we're going to create a dynamic temp saying you messed up, and then we're going to return temp. And the reason I do that as opposed to doing something like just return null is because that way, if we're going to be outputting it to our console.write line, it won't actually cause an error to happen. So it's just for this type of example. So we have our get set up. Now let's do set. So this time we want to say if data dot contains key index. So again, we're going to check to see if there's any data at that index. And if there is data at the index, we can simply say data sub index equals value. So we're going to just directly store into that index location the value. Else data.add, and if you use add, you need to have the index and value. So let's make sure I haven't made any mistakes so far. No output, so okay. No errors thus far. So again, the major changes here is that we changed the underlying variable type that we're using. So instead of using an array of strings, we've switched it to a dictionary, and the dictionary has types of dynamic that we're storing into it instead of like a string or an int. And then within the actual indexer as well, we're using type dynamic versus type string. And then we have to modify our get and our set slightly because we're using a dictionary, and we want to do a little error testing. But it should be relatively straightforward, and it hopefully makes sense thus far. So now what do we do? Well, now we can actually have clients of different types. So before, if we went here, we could only have clients of type string. If we said C sub 4, well, let's do it after. C sub 4 equals 23 or 233. We couldn't do that. You can't convert an int to a string. It makes sense. We're stuck with an array of strings. But now we have a lot more flexibility. We can say clients C equals new clients. So again, we're creating an instance of our class and we're calling it C. C sub 0 equals Tom. C sub 1 equals Brian. And then we could say console.write line of C sub 0. And what would happen? We output Tom. So what happens if we added that kind of error testing within the get. So what happens if we try to access an index that doesn't exist yet? We'll say 23. We haven't assigned that yet. Let's fix that. It will tell you that you messed up. So that's nice to have that. So now here comes kind of the dynamic nature. Is now we could say clients D equals new clients and say D sub 0 equals 233. And we could say D sub 23 of 50 equals 500. And we don't have to go in order because we're using a dictionary. And then we'll say console.write line, and this time we'll do D sub 50. And we write that, and we've done it. So now we've created a program or a class called clients. It has a dynamic indexer that allows different types. We were able to accomplish that by using a dictionary as opposed to an array of strings. The dictionary had the type dynamic in it. And then the indexer also had type dynamic. And then the rest was pretty similar. It really was similar, but it gives you a little bit more flexibility. So hopefully that was useful for you guys.